What is it? Oh, really?
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the continuation of the public hearing for the Community Preservation Committee, reviewing applications for the FY24 cycle. Welcome. On our agenda tonight, we have presentations or speaking by two applicants that did not appear at our first hearing date in December, and also follow up on at least two of the other applications that we did hear from at the first meeting. And we'll pursue that, and then we'll discuss a little further the other applications, just any new information and questions that may come up. We'll go through that, and that's really the scope of work for tonight. We're not expected to deliberate in detail on any of the approval of the applications, probably not until our next meeting, just so everyone knows. So, very well. We have a quorum. If you don't mind, each member call out your name so that we know you're here, and those who eventually watch on the broadcast will know. Start with Millie.
Millie Milton, here.
Andy Dowd here.
John Campbell here.
Jeff Leland here.
Leslie Harrison here.
Sean Durkin here.
Andy Clark here.
Excellent. Thank you, everyone. All right. Without further ado, we welcome Rick Leaf, representing the Northborough Affordable Housing Corporation and our town's affordable housing effort in general. Thank you, Rick, for appearing. You may, if you like, review the letter you'd written to the committee about what you'd like to see us do, and also some business matters you'd like us to do regarding the Affordable Housing Corporation monies previously granted.
Well, thank you for having me here tonight. I appreciate it. Northborough Affordable Housing Corporation continues to appreciate the support we've gotten over the years from the town and the committee on our efforts to create safe, affordable housing for people in the town of Northborough. As we've done in the past, we've had warrant articles that have granted money for the use of the housing corporation, sometimes for present projects and sometimes to be stored in reserve for future projects. And as the application stated, from 2015 through 2019, there was a total of $950,000 approved for future use by the Affordable Housing Corporation. $450,000 of that was approved for the wonderful project that was done for the two houses on Main Street next to Trinity Church, one of which was the old Gale General Store, which we were able to preserve and turn into two affordable condominiums, and next to it a smaller house into which two other affordable condominiums were done. And that was done as a partnership with Habitat for Humanity, where the town funded half of the cost of the project through CPA money, and Habitat for Humanity funded the rest of the project through their own fundraising, gifts in kind, and volunteer labor. That's turned out to be a very good project for the town. So that reduced the $950,000 down to $500,000. In 2020, once again with Habitat for Humanity, the town approved $50,000 to be spent on the renovation and restoration of a condominium at 24 Hitching Post Lane that had gone into foreclosure. The bank donated the property to Habitat. And Habitat went ahead and rehabilitated it. Now has a low-income family in there. It turns out that they did the project under budget, and so the entire $50,000 was not required. And so what remains now of that originally $950,000 is basically, I want to get this down to the exact pennies, $473,144.35. That's what remains of the $950,000 that had been approved through warrant articles in 2015 through 2019. Since that time, the Housing Corporation has not requested any other additional money to go into reserve, because our feeling is a reserve fund of about $500,000 is appropriate to address any future issues that may come up. So there have been 10% set aside in 2020, 2021, 2022. There'll be another 10% set aside in 2023. All of that money would have to go before town meeting for approval for a project. But the 473 was approved on the basis that if something came up in the short term, the CPC and the selectmen could approve its use without a town meeting vote. So there's some additional money sitting in unallocated, unused 10%, but that money is not available for NHC use with just approval of the CPC and the selectmen. The application talks about some needs that are existing potentially for the money that would, I think, recommend going forward and extending the money. I guess the other thing I'll say is all these warrant articles basically approve this money to be spent in 2 years. If it was not spent in 2 years, then our housing corporation will come before the CPC each year and make a case for the extension of unspent money for another fiscal year. So right now, this $473,000 is available until June 30th of 2023. And the purpose of this request is to ask the CPC to extend the money until June 30th, 2024, in other words, for the next fiscal year. And there are a number of potential uses for the money that I think justifies doing that. One of which is there is another condominium in foreclosure at Hitching Post Lane, and the Housing Corporation and the town and Habitat for Humanity have been negotiating with DHCD and the bank to see if the bank would donate that property. If they would, I think there'd be a project to renovate that and restore it, as we did with 24 Hitching Post Lane. As of this point, the bank that owns that property has not committed to donating it to Habitat for Humanity. DHCD has indicated that the bank will not be able to just foreclose that property. The only way they can use it again is to make it available to a qualified low-income family through a lottery. So the bank is going to have to decide if they want to do that on their own, or which would be the cleaner approach would be to donate the property to Habitat and let us go forward and do it as we did with 24. So that's a potential project. Another potential project is down on Boundary Street. Not all of the land on Boundary Street that the town owns is going to be used for the dog park. And in the fall, once that was apparent to the Housing Corporation, we got together with Habitat for Humanity, and their executive director and I and Lori met. And they are evaluating a particular part of that property on the eastern border near Marlborough, which could be developed into additional affordable housing. They haven't completed their evaluation yet. When they do, they'll come back to us, and if we think that's viable, that could be another joint venture between the town and Habitat, where some of this money that's in reserve could be used to offset the cost of that project. Also not aware to us at the time we submitted this application were the proposals that came into the White Cliffs Committee. One of those proposals is one to create affordable housing on the White Cliffs property. If the committee feels that that is the best proposal, and if the town would agree to that, the developer of that proposal has specified that for them to get the necessary state and federal funding, the town would also have to provide some funding, and most likely CPA affordable housing funds could be used to do that. So those three projects are all currently in some state of flux right now, but all could have a use for the money. As you know, last year we were unsuccessful in working with the state to build more affordable housing over at the Housing Authority property on Summer Street. But the Housing Authority Board would like to continue to evaluate that. Their executive director retired, and they're right now looking for a new executive director. And when in fact that person is hired, the Board of the Housing Authority would like to revisit creating affordable housing on that property in conjunction with the state. And once again, CPA money could be usable for that. So there are a number of things, all potential uses for the money, that would lead me to advise that we extend the money for one more year to June of 2024. And then, as we always do, we'll come back in the fall of this year and revisit where we are and make further recommendations. So that's kind of what we're doing and where the recommendation stands. Be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Rick. Any questions from anyone on the committee?
Rick, what was the address of the first one that you talked about? Was it another one in the Hitching Post?
Yeah, so 24 has been complete, and a family has moved into 24 Hitching Post. And the one that's still in foreclosure, and nothing's been done on is 15 Hitching Post. But once again, DHCD has told the bank that the only way they can turn that property over is to sell it at an affordable price through a lottery to a qualified low-income family. It's either the bank is going to figure out a way to do that, or the Housing Corporation and Habitat stand ready to do that if the bank is willing to donate the property.
You think that could happen? The bank would determine it not to be a
The
viable
property
asset
went
for
to
them.
foreclosure in 2008. So,
What is the bank's name? What bank is
I
it?
don't know what the bank's name is. Do you know, Lori?
I can't remember off the top of my head. It's in pretty bad shape though, that unit. It needs a lot of repairs.
Just the one from a few years ago where it had a lot of mold and water damage.
Yeah, the electricity got shut off in the wintertime. Nobody drained the pipes, so the pipes burst. And the bank has gone in and spent some money to get it to a point where it would be saleable, but 2 or 3 times they've advertised foreclosure, and 2 or 3 times we've caught it, notified DHCD, and they told the bank, pull the ad. You just can't foreclose the property. So we keep an eye on it. Every time we see an ad go in the paper, we tell the state, and the state tells the bank, pull the ad. So I think at this point they've learned they just can't foreclose the property. They're gonna have to follow the state's affordable housing rules. There's an affordable housing restriction on the deed. How it went into foreclosure because it was refinanced multiple times. How it ever got to be refinanced is another question, but it was done. And the owner eventually couldn't afford the mortgage anymore and skipped town. So it sits.
Sounds like a mess.
It is, but once again, we have the ability to do something about it. But we're not gonna pay for that property. If the bank donates it, we'll get in there and do something. And if we do that, we'll be back to you to ask for a certain amount of funding out of this $473,000 to help offset the cost of it. But right now, no movement.
Excellent. Well, the committee has supported your request in previous years to re-up the funds for an additional year. I see no reason why we wouldn't do it again. And I would entertain a motion that essentially mimics the last paragraph on the last page of the application letter. If anyone could bring that forth.
So moved.
I think we need to state it for the record. But I did make it easy for you.
I tried. Where do you want it? Move that based on the information included in this application, NAHC requests that $473,144.35 in funding remaining unallocated for 2015, 16, 17, 18, and 19. Approved funding be extended until June 30th, 2024.
Second.
Motion from Jeff, second from Andy Dowd. Thank you. Any discussion or question on the motion?
Second.
Thirds, great too. Hearing none, can I have a vote by show of hand? All in favor? And any opposed? Let the record show was approved unanimously, 7-0.
Thank you very much. Really appreciate your support.
Rick, on behalf of the committee, I thank you for your tireless effort for affordable housing in town. We really are indebted to you.
Good work.
Okay, moving on really well here. The next thing on the agenda was a follow-up from Ashley and Amy on the Aqueduct Multi-Use Trail, based on some new information.
Good evening. So since the last time we met with you all, Scott worked with the BSC group, Scott Charpentier, worked with BSC group to get a new proposal and scope of work provided to us, and I forwarded that on to John to review, and it has a lot more detail, really goes through exactly what they will provide, including assisting with applying for funding after the fact. And so I just wanted to see if there are any questions on that, but we've also had some information in the last week. As part of a Mass Trails grant, you need a letter of support from the owner of the property on which the trail will go. That is the MWRA in this case, and Vincent Vinali, the conservation agent, worked with MWRA, reached out to them, and they're not able to provide a letter at this time. We're hoping that we hear back from them in the next few weeks, but they need to kind of take that question up the chain, and they'll be getting back to us. So we're hoping that before you make your final determinations, we'll have an answer on that, and then, you know, if they're not able to provide that letter of support, we'll obviously hold back on proceeding with with this plan from BSC.
So the letter of support, you think, is a blessing you need to go forward, where it previously there hadn't appeared to be any obstacle?
Well, you
It's a
need to
formality?
apply for the grant.
Yeah, I
Oh,
mean,
I see.
if we want to go for the Mass Trails grant, which I think we do, I mean, we've always planned to, that's a requirement. We don't necessarily have to go for the Mass Trails grant, but I think the town would appreciate us attempting to go for that.
Yeah, substantial additional support, right? Is there any precedent where MWRA has given support to another community for a similar project, which leads you to have encouragement?
I was gonna look it up today. We just found out today, so
Yeah,
we haven't had time to look into it.
we can
So-
definitely find that out.
If I can clarify a little bit. So I had spoken to that individual from MWRA during the summer, and they are definitely supportive of having the trail go over the bridge. However, they're not 100% on board about having a paved trail, and they're throughout the extent. They may be interested in doing the stone dust, but we haven't received confirmation from that. So the individual we've been speaking with needs to put it up the chain in order to get confirmation as to whether they're open to stone dust or whether they're not. So they have approved, you know, doing improvements, allowing improvements at grade crossings, so, you know, road connection improvements, but they just are not prepared as of today to say definitively that they would be on board with stone dust or pavement along the entire lane.
So just so I understand, do you think it's three choices? They either are not in favor of anything, or they're in favor of it with stone dust as opposed to asphalt, or they're okay with asphalt? Is that three possibilities or something like that?
I suspect that if they're gonna approve something, it would be more along the lines of stone dust than asphalt. But it really is too early to say, because like I said, the gentleman I spoke to, Sean Naden, didn't feel comfortable giving us solid indication. He said that he wasn't saying no, but they're just not saying yes at this period of time. But hopefully we will get more information over the next couple of weeks.
I mean, I think, oh, sorry, go ahead, Scott.
Thank you, Ashley. Mr. Chairman, so a fourth alternative from the MWRA's perspective may be crossings and portal connections only. As Lori indicated, you know, at grade crossings, specific treatments there, and then portal connections where they're connected to our properties, you know, our other trails and access points.
Which, I mean, for this plan, that's the biggest, I mean, that's the biggest amount of work.
Certainly
Are
part of
those
it, yeah.
crossings, and that's what really make this a really usable trail. But I think, you know, previously, there's been a bit of staff turnover, and we had heard from Mia before she had left that stone dust was okay. She had talked to the MWRA, but we didn't have anything in writing. So after the last meeting, Amy and I said we really need to get something in writing. But with the holidays, staff hasn't really had much time to talk to MWRA. So like Lori said, today they talked to them, and it's kind of, I think MWRA needs some time to think about it. But there have been materials that have been distributed by MWRA that talk about stone dust as an allowed surfacing on the MWRA trails. So we're hoping that, this is something they'll be okay with.
At the very least, it sounds like a reliable contact at MWRA for communication, where that hadn't always been the case in the past, so.
Right. Yes, it took us a while to find this individual, and so he's been responsive to us, which is great.
Good. Well, when you sent the BSC information, and I shared with you, the scope is tremendous. I mean, this was much different than what you'd brought before, and if it were to go forward, this is the guide that I think you want.
For sure.
And I noted, something about collaboration with the consultant already working on the bridge crossing, which obviously makes sense. So it looks, it's well prepared.
Yeah.
Thorough. It's well set up, let's put it that way.
Yes, thank you, Scott.
We get a hint of going forward. Yeah, that was a good step to take, so.
Yeah.
So hopefully you would have an update before, February 2nd, I think, is our next meeting.
Yeah, that's our plan. Obviously, we'll see what happens.
Very well. Anyone else on the committee, questions around the scope of work? Keeping a positive outlook that MWRA might give approval, so it could be considered. Anyone else?
Is the stone dust versus asphalt environmental, is that what that is? Or,
I'm feeling it's more about, well, it could be. I'm not sure. I thought it was more about accessing the aqueduct itself, I think, but I'm not entirely sure.
It may be construction needs and methods related. The aqueduct is old and with relatively shallow cover, and it's a brick arch in most of its corridors, so it may be constructability.
okay.
It's true. If anybody hasn't seen Norm Corbin's presentation on the building of the aqueduct, it's really eye-opening. All the brickwork and how they did it, it's really cool.
It's certainly less expensive.
As
well.
it stands now, does the MWRA, they allow it to be used right now as a trail?
We do.
Okay.
Right now, it's grass.
Yeah.
So it has some limitations, it's not so easy to ride a bike. A stroller is challenging, not ADA compliant.
Yeah.
So it has limitations, but if you want to walk along it or jog along it, it's great.
Good skiing, too. Except when you get to the road. But, yeah, so I'm not sure your project addresses that. That's okay.
Think
I
about
just-
it.
My skis are old, I just clomp along, get back on the other side.
That sounds dangerous.
Depends on your definition.
Well, thank you, guys.
Thanks.
Thank you for taking the time to come in and what you've done so far, appreciate it. Okay, moving on. We now have the presentation by representatives of the First Parish Church regarding your application for the steeple repairs and related work.
Do you have your flash drive? I can do it for you.
Okay, you'll be sitting there and I should sit here.
Or you can stand, yes.
Look, where's it gonna project?
Heads.
It's
your head.
gonna be right over your head.
Yeah, right, maybe I should stand to the side.
It is totally your choice. Just welcome and identify yourselves, please.
I'm Gordon Hart.
Hi, Gordon.
with First Parish Church. I'm Dave Sherman. I am the current overseer of operations for the church. I'm in my second term of that. And
Yes, thank you.
it's all a PowerPoint presentation at this point.
Okay.
Give me a
you know, and we did a preliminary review at our meeting in December with Norm Corbin standing in for you a little bit. So we've all looked at it, but I think hearing more detail, we're very interested.
Okay, well, this is above my head, but you'll be able to see it if I'm sitting here, so I'll stand to the side. First Parish, Northborough Structural Steeple Repairs. And so Dave and I are representing the church. Next. The request for funds is to repair the internal parts of the steeple. CPC funds were provided 5 years ago for external repairs, including repainting and new gold leafing. I'll show you a couple photographs that explain that in a minute. For this year, we're requesting $200,000. Total project's about $250,000. So the churches would provide the balance of the funds. We were requested to look into the MPPF, and it's not available for our meeting house. We're not on the state register of historic places, and that's like the #1 rule. So our church was built in 1950 to replace one that would have been historic, or built in 2000 or 1808. But anyway, this photograph was taken well prior to 2017. So what you see is most noteworthy, I think, are the open spaces up high. The bell's behind there. You can see the bell from the photograph. But for basically 67 years or so, those spaces were open. The clock faces, they're 3. One's not showing. Need new gold leafing. You can't see the weather vane on the top, but that has gold leafing as well. Things don't look bad in this from the point of view of paint, but this was taken in 2008. Everything above the peak roof line got repainted. And if you roll to the next slide, here's the facade. This photo was taken just a few months ago. You can see the new louvers, okay, and those don't stop wind-driven rain, but they prevent a lot of it from going in. See, one of the clock faces has new gold leafing. The weather vane was rebuilt. The louvers up in the top, just below the cupola, those were already there, but they were replaced. They were in bad shape. So there was a lot of work done from peak up. If you could, I just wanted to mention there was a lot of water leakage prior to 2017. My estimate is we reduced the water leakage by 90 to 95%. In straight rain, it's no problem, but with wind-driven rain, there are still problems. Go to the next slide. When you go up into the bell tower at the level where the bell is and where those new louvers are put in, you see the bell. And the bell is supported by what we call a cradle, and you can't get back from it to get a good photograph of the whole thing, but basically it's structural wood. And as you can see, the wood is deteriorated from rot. This needs to be replaced. We've stopped using the bell because of this. As far as the work done 5 years ago, it probably reduced the rate of rot, but I mean, for 67 years, that's the space up there where the bell is, was just open to the elements. So that's the consequence, and this needs to be replaced. There's staircases within the bell tower. These are in lousy shape. They need replacement. When you see them, they're not that safe. Now, the public doesn't go up there, just people like Dave and me, and occasionally workers for 2 cell phone companies that have antennas.
We call it the Not for the Faint Heart Club.
Yeah. Anyway, there are 2 sets of staircases. Next slide.
Good thing you're men of God. Because
inside the bell tower, but underneath the level where the bell is, the bell's above this, you can see the planks that are suffering from rot. The structural beams aren't too bad, but, this wood all needs to be replaced. So, people walk around up there when they're working, so this is what supports them. As you know, wood rot just goes from bad to worse. On the outside of the bell tower, so what you see on the left there is roofing material that's horizontal. I think there's a slight slope to it, and the white is vertical. You see where the sealants have broken away, and some of that wood is rotting. This isn't just one location. There are several as you go 360 degrees around this thing. But when we since we put in the application, we had this weather event on Friday, December 23rd, and I'm sure you all remember. I was out of town, but I read about it. Primarily, I read about Buffalo, New York. Of course, got 4 feet of snow instead of the horrendous amount of rain that we got, which was, I don't know, what we had, 50-mile-an-hour winds or something like that. A lot of water got in there.
So Gary Phillips and I were up there that day. That's how we spent that storm, and there was a lot of water coming in. We are going to be talking to our tenants there, the cell phone folks, and to examine their equipment, make sure that everything's sealed up there. This picture here was actually how I was introduced to the situation, because early on in my tenure as overseer, I pulled into the yard when AT&T, I believe it was, had all their cranes and scaffolding set up their latest remodeling about 3 years ago. When I identified myself as the overseer, the crew boss said, "You're the guy I want to talk to," and he brought me up to the bell level and showed me this. And of course, that's became a can of worms, because the other picture of the broken strut to the bell cradle, you have to crawl over that to get to the louver, and then you're looking at the stairs and so forth and so on. So a lot of hours been put into, trying to find out how to deal with this, talking to contractors. We do know the two things we want to do is that we agree on is we're not going to be hiring Joe Carpenter to do the work, and then we want to do it right this time, so we're not doing it again in 7 or 8 years.
Next slide, please. This is a photograph that was taken just a couple of weeks ago after the December 23rd event. You can see how wet those floorboards are. This is the bell is just above there. We do have a couple of drain pipes, I understand, but some of the water was coming down
We
the
need to
outside
service
of
those
drain
pipes.
So there's something not working well there, but really December 23rd was an excessive event. Next slide, please. So the goal of the project is to restore full structural integrity of the steeple, prevent future water leakage into the steeple, allow the church to use the bell again, and just want to point out that the Northwest Historical District Commission heard a presentation from us a couple months ago, and they voted to, I'm not sure if support's the right word, or approve it, or endorse it, or something.
Letter of endorsement.
Endorse it, is that a better word? Okay. Next slide, please. So the basis for the costs are largely based on a proposal from Minuteman Building and Preservation from June 6. Includes the cost for permitting, crane rigging, the scaffolding, removing, replacing the bell. So they would literally take the bell out, bring it down, put it on the ground, and go in there and replace all those rotted floorboards, take out the cradle that supports the bell, and put in a new cradle. Includes the cost of replacing stairs, which is that's a separate project, and the roof and then that rotted wood on the outside, resealing all that. We increased the total by 10% to account for anticipated inflation. There's also engineering evaluation costs of $500,000 total, and that's in our application. Next slide. In summary, this work needs to be performed to assure that First Parish Church's steeple remains beautiful and functional for another 72 years, or hopefully more.
open it up to the committee, please. Speak up with any questions.
I know you indicated it was, on the previous go-around, when we did the louvers,
Yeah.
that a lot of the water penetration was from the cable communication company's installation previous years. Have they, or have you asked them to assist in making this weather-tight?
I've been beating the drum recently with the governing
Yeah.
board. We definitely have to do
We
that.
have talked to them about it, and actually, one of the sets of cables is new since 2017. And so, yeah, we were aware of the potential for problems, and when they put in new cables. I believe the other phone company has replaced their equipment and cables, so we've kept an eye on everything, and
I just remember from the years ago that part of the problem was from the telecommunications company, and they either chose to ignore it or said it wasn't their fault.
I'm literally.
It doesn't matter, because clearly the place is in need of repair.
I'm holding my breath right now that the governing board says that we need to really move forward and talk to the contractors. You know, my interaction with them, they've been wonderful. You know, the people that come out there, you know, have been very cooperative and open to helpful. You know, I mean, like I said, I wouldn't have been aware of the situation up there. You know, the boss that day hadn't taken me up there and shown me to it. So I think we should get some cooperation. We did talk to Janet Legary, who's our legal consultant, and I guess there's, you know, nothing in the contract that says they're responsible for rebuilding the steeple water, so, you know, we have to kind of be diplomatic.
Really?
And, hopefully,
Should have Todd write that contract.
hopefully get some help, you know, in those situations. It is their responsibility if it's their responsibility.
So I have a question. So no matter what happens, the way with the louvers, it's not watertight anyway, right? So you're saying in these extreme events, water's to come in. So this is gonna happen again. Are different materials being considered so that it might be less?
I think a lot of
Susceptible
what
to-
was done originally was good because there's a rubber diaphragm underneath the bell, and a water diverting system and whatnot.
Oh, there is, okay.
It's complicated, you know. I think where water's coming in is probably more than I can count on my both hands, you know, and you have to deal with all those things individually, including the cell phone people and leaks coming in from these, you know, fascia board.
yeah, it's difficult to pin down these leaks because I showed you the photograph on the exterior there where you have the horizontal roofing and the vertical. There's areas where the water, where the boards have rotted and the sealant's broken away. I think things were better 5.5 years ago after the work. In fact, I know they were better. So there's been some deterioration since then in terms of how leak-proof it is.
Yeah, it seems to be changing with time, and also it changes with which way the storm's coming in.
Yeah, I mean, we get a nor'easter once a year, and whenever we get 2 nor'easters, we just had this thing, which was maybe the worst storm.
Yeah, and most of the damage seems to be toward the east side of the
Yeah,
steeple.
yeah, to point that out, it doesn't mean there's not areas that need to be replaced all the way around, or go through a rehabilitation.
And in all of that, the bell, you know, seems to be the thing that goes to everyone's heart. You know, I was married in that church 3.5 years ago, and my children and my grandchildren rang that bell, you know. And there's so many more stories that I've heard about how important that bell and that.
So the bell on the ground, just a slight aside, is a Revere bell, right?
That's the.
Yes.
But the one in the
Revere
belfry
bell.
is not a Revere bell.
Yeah, the Revere bell that came down in the fire thing.
Yeah, that was salvaged. You know.
Yeah.
It's got a couple cracks in it, so.
My wife goes out and plants flowers around.
Yeah, Revere bell is permanently retired.
And revered.
Any other questions? Well, I appreciate you coming and filling us in. It's a lot more thorough than hearing it from me than just reading the report. For the record, I had asked you by email about the possibility that the cell lessees would contribute in the name of maintenance of the structure that they're using. And you mentioned Janet Ruggieri, who, she is on.
She's on the
what's her role
governing
again?
board.
She's on the governing board, that's right. Also an attorney by profession, correct? And her response to me, both verbally and in her email back, was that basically she didn't consider it much of a prayer that you could get help without litigating it, which no one's asking you to sue them. You're implying you might beat the drum a little more.
Yeah.
Okay.
Janet wasn't up there in the great storm of December 23rd. Watching the water coming down, and again, this is just a wonderful community here, Gordon, all these presentations and whatnot are Gordon's work and his expertise and his experience from before, I can't do my job without these folks, so I appreciate all they do. And I'm very honored to be here with you folks tonight.
Yeah, thank you for your time and appreciate financial assistance in the past and hopefully in the future.
Thank you. That's a great asset to the town. We'll do what we can for sure.
Okay.
Thanks very much. Okay, we've done well on our agenda timing. We were going to discuss in general the other applicants. I do think, David?
Yep.
You're here from ARHS regarding the athletic field complex project. So we did hear the presentation at the first meeting, and we understand you've drastically scaled back the application. Do you want to just speak to where you stand now and what you're asking for?
Yeah. So I wasn't at the first meeting. I apologize. That was done a little bit out of cycle. I believe that the scaled back was potentially an ask. I do know that the CPC eligible amounts were much higher as to what we should qualify in versus not. I think I have a couple questions back to you guys, if it's at all possible, just to understand the inner workings in follow-up. But we are trying to do something that's para pursue between both Northborough and Southborough, and so there's different pieces of the pie. If the scale back is where sort of our fallback plan versus what is the appetite of the group to understand what is potentially eligible at CPC versus not, and where we're at is trying to move the project forward. We have all the bidding set up. Gale Associates has got all of our design in hand, so we have a level of detail probably that wasn't available even a month ago. But in essence, we're just trying to explore what the appetite is of the group and the approval process, and ultimately try to balance that out with our neighbors and partners in Southborough.
Well, reviewing what we covered a little bit at the first review of it, the aspects of the application are applicable for CPA funding, with the exception of turf.
Correct.
It had been ruled years back that synthetic turf is not eligible for CPA funding. And, that's a significant chunk of what you're doing, obviously, but other aspects of it are eligible. So it meets that standard. And then they had expressed that the revised request was for the tennis court restoration, and that's been reiterated in a revised application that we received.
Correct.
So that the application request now is $352,701. And under that, if that's the number and you're supporting that, then we'll take that into consideration with everything else on the menu, if you will, for this year. As far as the appetite, that's kind of not the word I would use. In general, the committee has adopted a culture and a style where each year we're looking at eligibility, as we just covered, of an application, community support in general compared to other applications, and level of urgency this year compared to other years of funding in terms of how urgent would it be, where does it rank in urgency to approve it this year as opposed to a future year? And then affordability, and that's really what it comes down to as opposed to appetite is, where would it fit in what we would consider to be more urgent priorities, or in this case, other obligations that we already have, one of which is we're paying every year on the White Cliffs bond. So we are pretty much obligated to bring that forth to the town again, and so on. And then we've got a minimum in each category of affordable housing, historic, and open space conservation. And so those take away from current year revenue. Having said that, it's not impossible, but we have a full slate again this year, so we do have a bit of a challenge in figuring out what is affordable. And I think one factor that we touched on a little bit at the beginning of our informal conversations is the funding for, the potential need to fund restoration at White Cliffs is always present in our review here, because the CPC supported the town buying that property, and so we have some obligation to continue to support it. And we're in a phase now where consultants on board and new proposals have come in for what we might do to it. And some of those proposals indicate they're going to be requesting CPA funding of a substantial amount in the next year or future years. So we have to look at that in terms of our reserves. Do we need to keep enough reserve to make sure we cover what might come in for that, since it would always rank as a high priority. That's the big picture of where we are right now. So I talked a lot there. Other members, any feedback from either the first meeting or from what David's brought now and on the scaled back nature of the application? Comments, questions? No one? I guess it's pretty straightforward. We see what it is. We know what the tennis courts are. We heard the presentation before that they're used a lot. It's certainly CPA funds have been used for other recreational properties in town. The one other aspect that came up at the other meeting that maybe you didn't hear clearly, but if we were to consider it, we would be interested in whether Southborough is also going to approve it. While it's not necessarily required legally, I think that the committee is interested in knowing that if we approve something, that Southborough's CPC committee would also approve it. And theoretically, if we were to support the application, we might make it conditional on them voting for it also. And even that their town meeting approved it as well, if you follow me. So it would be
more than follow. I was actually there at that meeting. I would just, without speaking on their behalf, the approval has not gone through. I can't say whether it will or not, but the trend line here is the opposite than where they're going. They're looking to leverage even deeper coffers probably from the CPC opportunities. They see the tennis courts as being a piece of the community use case, and so they probably are looking at a different trend line, and so that's why I think there's a little bit of uncertainty with our initial ask, which wasn't 100% of what was eligible in the outset, and then I think it was scaled back due to maybe some feedback or some exchange thereafter to try to maybe find a way to appeal or to the board. And I can speak to the latter two of year three, but obviously the front half is really more internal for you guys. Community sort of acceptance and interest, and then ultimately timeliness The approval is expected, right, to be presented through warrants both in Southborough and here.
Right.
We haven't announced our town meeting date yet, as of yet, I don't believe. But they're end of March, we're probably the beginning of April, or thereabouts. And we'll have bids ready. Obviously, that can't be done until post facto for those approvals. But we're highly confident that this will be a late spring, early summer shovel in the ground with approvals and all expectations. And then it'll be ready for September fall sports. There's a whole matriculation of how to sort of put that in to the calendar and be successful with contingency.
Even if this were approved, CPA funding wouldn't be available until July 1st, right?
Correct.
I have a question. John indicated one of our criteria is a level of urgency. When you guys scaled back your ask for us, I would contend myself, from what I know of the facilities, the level of urgency would be the track first, and the fields are in good shape, and the tennis courts appear to be well-used and well-maintained. Do you guys do an internal review yourself on what you really need?
Yeah, so unfortunately, it's not, so from a project perspective with the funding piece, we've sort of, until we have approvals and understand what would be covered, we can't finalize the project plan, but it's not, everything being done at the same time. There is a phasing that could be accommodated for that. So, I mean, until we kind of get to that point, it's tough to expect anything more out of you guys or us to align invoicing and funding. Back to your question, it's not just the track is awful. It's quite frankly condemned by the MIAA for certain events already, and towns have already refused to let their student athletes compete on our track. The same, unfortunately, is for the tennis courts. We have fissures in the tennis courts that render 2 courts completely unplayable. The fields, to your point, are beautiful grass fields down on the lower side, but the grass fields are inadequate to handle the load, the basic loads of our current teams. Forget the additional opportunities. We'll get 6x playability, both at a community and a interscholastic level, with turfing those 2 fields. And while the surface won't qualify, that's pretty understood throughout. The base prep, some of the groundwork is all covered, as well as soon as we touch any of this, the stands become immediately required to be brought up to code. They are not ADA compliant today. In fact, if you've frequented any game of any type or graduation, they line up wheelchairs and the handicap on the track because they can't enter the stands. So there's a lot of competing, as you said, erosion and issues with end of life. And the field itself can't be used because it needs to be rested, and that's why if you've ever walked the field itself, it looks very patchy because aeration won't actually solve the actual problem. We're just treating the symptom in that top layer. So it's unfortunately, a series of events that sort of a chain of events sets off once we touch it. We have an entire FAQ page with, unfortunately it has grown, but we wanted to respond to the community. We've had multiple tables set up asking for questions and really try to challenge the process. And so if you go to, I think it's complex.org, you're able to access not only the current conditions, the future state, and all of the questions that we've collected through the community, both with kids in school and maybe not have aged out or that are more community-based, irrelevant to really the interscholastic piece.
Any other questions? Okay, well, our committee's timeline is to meet again first Thursday in February, and again in early February if necessary. And that's when we tend to take all the data we've received on all the applications and start coming to a determination of what's affordable or not this year. No judgments have been made yet, so.
So just my question back to you guys, and sorry for the naivete of how the interaction works, but So when you say you're gonna meet again, what is sort of the current feeling on the application, or how does that mature over time? Just because I'm not familiar exactly with the approval, consideration and approval process.
So you mean in general, how does our process proceed?
Yeah, I mean, you just outlined that you would meet again in February. I probably wouldn't have an answer even then.
No, I think I said, we expect to make determinations in February at the next meeting if,
Oh, at the next- I'm sorry.
and if needed, at a subsequent meeting. Sometimes we run on and new information comes up and things change, but our process historically at that point is to, literally take stock of what are our resources, current revenue that's determined to be available to us. It's essentially the future year's revenue, CPA revenue, determined by our town accountant, and what are our reserves. And we start, first of all, with our minimum obligations. We know we have to put a minimum of 10% into each of the 3 core categories. We know we have to meet ongoing obligations. I mentioned the White Cliffs bond payment. We also had at least 2 of our projects, applications this year are phase 2 of something that the town already approved last year. So they will tend to get priority on that basis, if it's fair to say. But once again, nothing's been determined 100%. And then we'll start to look at what's left over. And what differs in Northborough maybe versus Southborough is our planning for the historic preservation category, White Cliffs primarily, and what we might need to be doing for that. And that's a topic that this town spent a lot of time on this year. And with new information unfolding as recently as the last couple of weeks, we're going to be taking that into consideration. So that's how our process will go. And almost every time the committee comes to consensus on what makes sense to put forward, what makes sense to be affordable for this year, and also consensus on which applications really aren't applicable at all. And I already told you in the beginning, this is certainly applicable. So we do those kinds of things, and most times correct me if I'm wrong, you guys, but most times our votes end up being unanimous after we've hashed through, does this make sense or not? And the committee members tend to talk more in those meetings than they did tonight.
I'm just kind of taking it all in right now.
My only question would be to you guys, do you have a complete data set, or is there other stuff that maybe detail-wise you'd like to have to consider in your internal deliberations?
I think we have, from your application, enough information for the discussion to move forward. And I think all the other, it should technically all be contained in the application, so I think all the other projects are equally as, detailed for us to handle the discussion. I don't think we had any really that were devoid of data enough to pitch on there, just on that merit, But again, this is aligning with a difficult year in terms of from the CPC perspective, I think, so. Just from the activity we have, especially in with prior commitments. So.
And I guess my last one would be, if Southborough does have a similar interest or push to be aligned with you guys, and they're going down an approval process, is that something that the board would want to know, or the committee would want to know in lieu of, or in, ad hoc, or is that, have no impact on your deliberation process?
John, you mentioned it possibly even being a prerequisite for a 5.5. I would advocate for that, actually.
I think we had talked about, as I mentioned, if we were to, in theory, if we were to vote to bring it forward, that a condition of that would be the Southborough side also bringing it forward, meaning that each town has the opportunity to vote for it.
Sure.
And that a further condition might be that, town meeting approval might, the town meeting warrant, in theory, might be also worded
Bless you.
that it would be contingent on the Southborough partner, just because it's a little complicated with, even though it's in Northborough, it's still a regional
We
facility.
like to call it DC.
So, okay?
DC, it's not a state. I guess my question was almost the opposite, and I'm happy that if that's a definitive for you guys, but if Southborough comes back and says, we're looking to increase the scope of consideration, but we also want to know where Northborough's board is at or committee is at, and they want to make a prerequisite, how do I communicate that back, or what's the most efficient communication path outside of meeting schedules if needed?
Well, bring forth any information you want us to know about
Okay.
prior to February 2nd. And then that meeting will, at a minimum, be open to the public, just like this one is.
Sure.
We're going to determine a little later in this meeting if we are continuing the public hearing, quote unquote. A little bit of technicality, but in any event, you and anyone else would be welcome to attend again. That's really where we're at. And, being honest and telling you that we haven't, there's no opinions been expressed or priorities, other than the things I mentioned that we know are kind of on the slate. We haven't had those discussions yet about which ones should get our favor, so to speak.
We're highly available if you do have questions and, or there's gaps in the information that you want a little bit more detail on. I know the application's thorough, but there's a lot more detail that lies beneath.
I appreciate that.
I actually do have a question, and I apologize if it's been
Sure.
discussed or if it's in here somewhere. There's a distribution between Northborough and Southborough.
Right.
Percentage, is this only our percentage of that? That's already been
Yes.
calculated, so it's already been
So-
prorated for that.
Right, so just round numbers, and again, please don't hold me to them, I don't have everything in front of me, but if you were to look at it as a $7.5 million total pie, it turns out to be about 60-40 town to town. Eligibility is about 6 and change for both towns. If you were to look at that, again, divided by the 60-40, right, the Northborough portion that is eligible is probably closer to, I think, the 2+. The tennis courts was the trimmed down, like I said, proposal. So,
Maybe, Leslie, your question is really, if your application is now $352,000 to Northborough,
mhm. Theirs is quite high.
and we are 61%, is your application to Southborough a commensurate amount,
No,
less than 352?
larger. Significantly larger. And they may be looking to increase that further.
Right.
So that's just, that's why I was referring to the para pursue, if that's what you guys potentially have a secondary interest or concern about. I would say that they may be asking us to increase the eligibility. I don't believe the first application included the full eligibility. They came with a subset of that, and then the 352, or thereabouts for tennis courts only, is a significant subset of the original eligibility. We went with similar degradation, I guess, of that eligibility in the first round with Southborough. We've since had a second, go with them, and their consideration, both from a general versus CPC only, and they're now meeting behind the scenes, to sort of figure that out, but there was a commentary that they want to explore maximizing that. So, and they do have competing budget concerns as well, but
Sure.
same, similar concern.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
So they're maximizing it also just for the tennis courts though, correct?
No, they're looking at ground, revisions, tennis courts, track, all of what can be eligible. And then then paring down from capability there,
Okay.
thereabouts.
Because they wouldn't be allowed to do the turf either, correct?
So,
But they could do everything under it.
right, what we,
Okay.
just really quick, because it is confusing. If we said the total project, including turf, was 7.5, back out about $1 million, and that takes away the turf,
Got it.
because it's just the actual turf and infill. Anything underneath that layer, the shock pad and all other things, the ground prep, drainage, that's eligible.
Okay.
So then we break it up from
Got it.
60/40.
I think we asked this in the prior meetings, but I'll ask it again.
Absolutely.
Is the regional school committee bringing forth a warrant article in each town
Yes.
regardless of CPA participation?
Don't think we have a choice, but yes. I'll have to defer that to the warrant being written and all, but yes. We have very little choice at this point, unfortunately. There's a lot of history as to why, but that's sort of water under the bridge. Today, we are at a position where if the fields are not redone, it's not an improvement, it's not a rounding error, they have gotten to the point of disrepair and what is more appropriate to call end of life.
Yeah,
We
yeah.
will have to rent somebody else's school in all likelihood if the track is not, repaired. The MIA events that we host in the tennis team will have to find a private facility and will pay out of pocket.
Yeah, understood. Okay, well, thank you. Very thorough, appreciate you coming
No.
in.
If there's anything else, I'm happy to do what I can to provide the info.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. We have several other applications. I guess I'm going to open it up a little more informally. If any members or any attendees wanted to add information, speak forth. Mr. Charpentier, always welcome.
Mr. Chairman, may I sit at the chair and
You may.
go through the two applications that I discussed at your prior
That would be,
hearing when it opened?
that would be awesome.
Oriented correctly. This is I'm Scott Charpentier, DPW Director in Northborough. This is the senior center trail that we discussed. The revision to the trail from what was previously submitted is related to the extent of the bituminous concrete surfacing. You'll see, the upper loop was originally shown as Bitconc. We have this as bituminous concrete now as well. We've got an additional survey, topographic survey that's come in. This section here is problematic for wheelchair access. We're working on getting this section accessible by amending the geometry. We've amended the geometry here. You can see the meandering to maintain wheelchair accessibility. So we have wheelchair accessibility around here. I'm trying to amend the geometry to get it to here as well. One of the challenges is with the Massachusetts Architectural Access Board, the limit for longitudinal slope is 5%. So in perspective, a 1/4 inch per foot is 2%. So it's a little more than a 1/2 inch per foot. It's relatively shallow slope. Anything above 5% is considered a ramp and would require handrails. That is not an option, obviously, on a walking trail. So our goal and objective, as it always has been, is to construct as much wheelchair accessible paths here as possible. And it's not just for wheelchairs, obviously, it's for walkers, it's for baby carriages and what have you. Again, we're progressing through the design. The development of the permit drawings are ongoing. One of the things that are slowing down the permit drawing development is my attempt, and it's because of me, my attempt to amend the geometry here to get this to be wheelchair accessible so they can get up to the pond on a wheelchair. This is all jurisdictional under the Conservation Commission's Wetland Protection Act duties, so we can't file until I've worked through our engineers and worked them over hard enough to try to get that accessible. So those are the only changes that are before you here.
And you don't anticipate a change in the budget request?
There will be no change in the budget request. I don't. There won't be.
It's fabulous.
Good.
It's amazing.
Again,
What's the total length again? Is it 6, 10?
a little over 6, that's about 3/4 of a mile. And as with all of our projects I bring before the CPC, any grant funds that are available, we'll certainly pursue. One of the grants that was discussed earlier is the Trails Grant, Mass Trails Grant. If it's viable and an eligible project, we'd certainly pursue that. I would not submit 2 grants to the same entity from the same community. So timing is of essence, but any other grants that are available, AARP has a grant program, Mass DOT has some as well, so we're pursuing all avenues for funding outside of just CPC.
Are you rerouting the trail, or do you have to regrade it for that section that's not handicap accessible?
We'll be regrading all of it to get a lot of the minor undulations out.
Yeah.
Some substantial regrading is to address the longitudinal slope issues here.
Okay.
This used to go further out on the last application out here,
Yeah.
and that was a steep slope up and down, so it was not accessible, so we're coming through in this direction. The other challenge is here, and there's a challenge back here. I lost the battle to try to make this accessible due to this, but I haven't given up this one yet.
Can you remind us, would any of the grants be matching grants?
All of the grants I'm discussing would require full funding by the local community because they're reimbursement grants.
That's what I mean.
So yeah, it would be very similar to the park grants that were awarded to the town for the town common, full funding by the community, and then the reimbursement, anything that's not used goes back to the, in this case, the CPC.
Scott, just to pick your brain a little, when you say you're reluctant, or actually you won't submit 2 grants from the same community to the same entity, do you have a choice of which one you prefer to permit?
I would prefer to submit the multi-use trail grant. It would be a phase 1 of a project, and like a lot of grant awarding entities, they favor the phase 2 when they've already funded the phase 1.
Yeah, I see.
That's a pretty substantive project as well, so that would be my preference.
And the chances are we could handle this as an entity much easier than
Yes.
4 or 5 or 6 miles, whatever.
Yeah.
It would also be a more competitive application because they tend to appreciate multi-community trail projects over single community
Yeah.
trail projects, so it has a greater chance of funding.
I see. Thank you.
Since you mentioned the subsequent years, what percentage typically are funded if the first year is funded, is matched than subsequent year?
Well, Mass Trails, the current application would be an 80% grant, 20% match when it comes to the multi-use trail. This is not a multi-community trail, so it would be much different.
No, I just meant like subsequent years. So you were saying the reason to submit the other one is because they tend to support subsequent years. Do you know what the stats are on?
I don't know.
Okay.
that.
Okay.
Well, excellent, thanks for the update on that.
The other project I have for you, which has more substantive update, is our dog park. And Mr. Dowd will be familiar with the situation along Boundary Street. So we discussed informally with the city of Marlboro about providing a potable water service connection for the dog park. They indicated that they were in favor of it. This is my peer in the DPW. Other project came up elsewhere on Boundary Street. Rick Leaf discussed it earlier about his prospective Habitats for Humanity. He reached out to me to touch base with my counterpart to see if water and sewer was available to them. When that request was made, it was brought upstairs to the mayor, and the mayor's response was there will be no utility connections outside of the city limits allowed. So the city of Marlboro is not allowing a potable water service connection to the dog park. That section of Boundary Street, I should have started with this, that section of Boundary Street is in Marlboro. The town city line is essentially the Assabet River. So these properties are located in the town of Northborough, but the frontage is on Marlborough Street. We actually have Windsor Drive, which is in Northborough. We have to drive through Marlborough to plow it. So because we can't connect to their water supply, we have to install a well. One of the requirements of the Stanton grant is potable water to a dog park, and I certainly wouldn't want to have a dog park without it. So we need to put a well in. This updated plan was provided in your package. Identifier 11 is the prospective well location. The offset from a property line to a well is 35 feet. And then the offset to a parking lot, Board of Health regulations do not have well offsets to dog parks. So a similar use I came up with was a parking lot. It's about as close as I can come up with. So 50 feet off, that's a private well, a municipal well, non-public water supply, with a water service that runs around and connects up in a similar fashion that we were proposing before. The issue is cost. The cost to install a well and a quarter of the circumference of the dog park of a water line is expensive. So what we've decided to do is amend the surface under a base bid approach to the small dog, the smaller areas here to be stone dust. We had discussed at the last meeting alternatives to I'll use a term, manufactured canine grass. It's not like the turf grass that the fields are. It's completely different, but it's still an artificial turf. We're proposing stone dust there with the well because of a cost differential. And again, Mr. Chairman, the cost of the project is not going up. The way I would like to bid it is this, what you see before you, would be a base bid that includes the stone dust, the well. We may, depending on what the cost estimates are for the well, we may end up with a few more stone dust trails in the wooded area. A bid alternate would still include the well. We remove some of the stone dust trails in the wooded area and put the canine turf back. I don't know what the bidding environment's going to be next fall after July 1 when the funding is available. Maybe contractors get hungry, I'm not sure. I'd prefer to put some bid alternates out there so maybe we can get a little more than we expect.
I see.
So what you see before you is within the proposed budget. If I can squeeze more in a fashion like bid alternates, I'm certainly going to do that.
Scott, so does that remove the fire hydrant?
We've amended the water services there to have a dog bowl station, I guess. You hit the button on the top and the dog bowl's filled with water.
So it's not a conventional fire hydrant?
Oh, we'll put a couple stub hydrants out there. We got plenty of them in the yard. The dogs will love it. They can have a Kennedy, they can have a Waters, they can have a Flash.
Service of the fire.
No, but there'll be a yard hydrant there for maintenance purposes.
Yeah.
The dog food service.
One of the things we're not gonna do is have a water fill station for people to use, nor, obviously, we're not gonna have a bubbler, but we're not gonna have a water fill station or a hose spigot open for public use. The concern is relevant to Mass DEP's regulations. If you serve more than 25 people a day by a groundwater source in accordance with Mass DEP regulations, you're considered a transient, non-community public water supply. I have not asked DEP for a formal determination on that. I know other communities have similar situations in a varying degree of uses. I do not want this to become, to be considered and deemed by Mass DEP to public water supply. So there will not be water available for human consumption here. It will be a potable water supply. The well will be a drinking water well like any resident has in their backyard. It will have water quality standards for private wells. Because of DEP's regulations, this cannot become a public water supply. It has substantial impacts for the community, operationally wise.
Sounds like a good approach.
Thank you.
And that the well's on other Northborough land too, right?
Yep,
The whole
that's
thing
correct.
is still Northborough.
That's correct. Yeah, the residence well is
Just gonna ask you.
right there.
Okay.
You can see there's a
Yeah.
offset line here, and here I went out to the yard and took swing ties to locate the well. That's where it is. So we are actually a little bit closer to the dog park than they are, but we comply with the local Board of Health regulations. I passed this past our health director as well before coming before you.
Well, the map's up. Where is the property that Rick was talking about for Habitat?
It's actually,
To the right.
It's off the screen,
It's
it's
right.
further to the,
yeah, so this is a small segment that's the towns, and then there's two more duplexes here,
Right,
and then it's over here.
okay.
Oh,
So this boundary street parcel goes for Northborough, dog park, small access way, larger swath with frontage. So there's essentially three fingers that come down.
so actually, I can show you on the map that was included in the package. He's interested in this area right
Got it,
here.
okay.
So this is what we're interested in. for the dog
So it's
park.
well away from
Yes,
barking dogs.
yes.
Thank you.
And there is municipal water and sewer in the street owned by the city of Marlborough that we're not being allowed to connect to.
Would they let Rick Leaf connect to it?
Nope.
No? Oh, so
He's
so
from Northborough,
We couldn't have a house there anyway.
not anymore.
We'll have to do a well.
Wells and septics for beef. Yes, it is.
So also, I included the community input flyer in your packages. So that's gonna be on Tuesday night at 6 PM via Zoom.
It'll be part of the Parks and Rec meeting. It's our second community input session. The first one was relevant to the siting. This one will be more specific to the amenities at the dog park itself.
Those some happy-looking dogs.
It's all about the back.
And I'm also in the process of preparing the grant application for the Stanton Foundation. So that would be for the balance of the design. And then once the final design is complete, then we'll submit a construction grant application to the Stanton Foundation.
So I have a question on the turf part, because the CPC funds this turf, but not the Algonquin turf?
Yeah, this is not athletic turf. It has a completely different material. There's no infill below it. It's
I like that carpet.
yeah, it's like a woven carpet that allows liquids to flow through as rapidly as they fall. So it doesn't puddle. It has that monofilament grass on it, and the underlayment is simply sand.
But CPC funds can do this turf
Yes.
even because it's different?
Yes.
Okay.
yeah, the restriction was specific to athletic fields.
Interesting.
Yeah, and I don't remember where it came from, but somebody sued somebody in the town
It may be
early on, and the state made a determination
Did
on
the
that aspect of recreation projects.
Didn't the state determine that they will not fund athletic, the turf fields through the school grant program? I know I live in Grafton, and our turf fields were not part of the Massachusetts School Building Committee's funding structure. We paid for that individually ourselves.
Yeah, I'll help you there.
I'll put my housing authority hat back on for a minute. The board, Norfolk Housing Authority met last night, and they still remain concerned, particularly about that house that directly abuts the dog park. And because it's a family housing there, and there are children there, you know what the distance is from that residence to the fence line, approximately?
It's about 110 feet, a little under, about 109 feet.
They've asked me to request if there'd be a possibility of having some more solid barrier type of fencing along that side to give them some, just protection from looking out at it. I know there's a fairly thick brush cover there, but that's obviously not there year-round. And, you know, there's concerns that it's gonna be an eyesore for the families living there.
We could do the slats like we have, you know, the town common between the town common and the gas station. There's that visual barrier, the black chain link fence, and then the black slats that go inside. It's a visual barrier. It doesn't prevent wind from going through, which is beneficial because it doesn't deteriorate as quickly. And it's certainly a sound reflective.
That'd be pretty inexpensive.
It's cost effective.
Yeah, obviously, we're not looking to further burden you with additional costs now that you have the well issue there, but that's the request from the board, so.
And Public Works and staff has always been supportive of keeping the neighbors happy with projects. You'll see, you know, we did additional amenities in the back of the town common due to concerns with the neighbors there, some additional plantings and arborvitae's. So in the event there's concerns in the future, we're here and we're not going anywhere, so we're always happy to help.
So have they been notified yet?
The neighbors?
Yeah.
I have not knocked them.
We sent the flyer to all of the abutters within 300 feet.
Okay, all right, so
Yes.
they'll have an opportunity
And
to,
we've confirmed that the families have been notified, because, you know, the housing authority owns it, so we got the initial notice, of course, but the families have received the notice, so thanks for doing that.
Scott, in the event the project's approved and moves to the next, moves to actual engineering and construction, in the engineering of it, do you anticipate any opportunity for moving the site laterally, to the left in your photo to increase that gap at all, or are you restricted on the left side?
We have restrictions on the left side. This blue line you see is the wetland resource line, and this kind of dotted white line is the buffer zone.
Okay.
So
I'll stay out of that.
while it's not a disallowed use, it's passive. If it's easy to accommodate meeting the buffer, other applicants do, and I think we should set a good example, meet the buffer as well.
Fair enough, thank you. It certainly seems that all steps are being taken to notify abutters, and this additional fencing would be a nice touch. Probably need to keep that idea at the forefront, Andy. Yeah, good thought.
And we can add a stockade fence as a bid alternate if the housing authority would like. There's plenty of time to do that. It doesn't need to be decided before the CPC's decision or town meeting decision, just before it bids out. So if the board changes their mind, like a stockade fence, not necessarily the whole property, but at least that's the house, right, 45-degree angle, this section here to be stockade, that's a reasonable request. I don't know if the dogs care about stockade. Mine didn't, I just stopped barking.
dogs only get so much say in this.
Lori, is the plan to post allowable hours for the dog park?
Dusk to dawn. So there's gonna be a sign with the rules of the dog park posted at the entrance, and it's gonna say dusk to dawn on it. So typically, there aren't gonna be any lights, so there isn't gonna be any use in the dog.
Lights are always a problem. Good. And it'll be enforced if it's needed to be, I guess. Maybe put a dog out front, too.
Guard dog.
Couldn't resist, sorry. Any other questions of Scott on this?
Could I ask him a question that's not straight on relevant to this? But
Do whatever you want, Sean.
it could be relevant to another one of our applicants. Are you having ongoing troubles with water and sewer with Marlboro that would preclude increasing our flow, say if we decide to do some type of housing in conjunction with the White Cliffs renovation? I mean, is Marlboro adamant about gallons per day, or is it just?
We cannot increase our flow discharge of sanitary sewer to Marlboro, period. That we cannot increase it over 800,000 gallons a day. We have adequate capacity to discharge a large housing development, much larger than what would accommodate, what White Cliffs could accommodate. Our average daily flow is about 500, 550.
I was just thinking if one of those proposals showed quite a few housing units.
We have plenty of capacity for that.
So why doesn't Marlboro get along with you, is what I guess I'm saying. What you do, Scott?
I'll direct you to Copeland and Page, Mr. Yeah.
Does not play well with others.
The fifth.
Not here to start a turf war. No pun intended. Anything else for Scott?
No, that's it.
Once again, thanks for your terrific support of these projects.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
You're from the Historic Society, right? Did you want to add anything to your application on the windows?
I really have nothing to add. I'm here really to answer any questions you might have and clarify anything that you need clarified to the best that I can.
Very good. We'll do, open it up to the committee. You guys did a good presentation the first time around. Your application's thorough. Any new questions or concerns from the committee on that application? Fire away.
I thought there were some unanswered questions about like maybe multiple years, or maybe doing some windows completely as opposed.
Yeah, I think you
on those?
brought that up, Leslie, at one point. Yeah, I went back and relooked at some of the numbers, and if we just do what I would call the street level, the windows at the street level, the estimate I looked at was probably close to half, like 36,000. If we do the museum level, the top level would be the remainder, roughly 35 and a little change. So it turns out to be almost half, which is kind of nice, because bottom level works out half, and do the other half.
Right, there's no financial downside to
there's
waiting,
no-
it sounds
you
like.
know, because there's larger windows at the top, there's more of the smaller ones at the bottom. Just kind of works out to be about half.
There was also talk about doing the windows complete, like because you're doing just the windows and not the trim and things like that.
Yeah, the current
Maybe
estimate
do-
we have is just for the windows themselves.
Okay.
The trim and the sill and the enclosure would have to be done separately. And we haven't really talked at great length as to how to go about doing that.
Okay.
But
Alright.
yeah, if the windows, once the windows are done, they can be removed if we ever go back, which we will. Go back and take the windows out and do the enclosure part, the trim and all that. We haven't really put a lot effort into trying to figure all that out. It's more of a carpentry issue than it is kind of a window restorer. The window restorer that we've been discussing this project with, amongst others, is really specialized, and she has the shop set up, the steam box, and she has to kind of, has done thousands of these things, so she has that skill level that we're looking for to do this work.
Thank you.
Yeah, sure.
Did you find out whether or not the windows had to be certain insulation properties or anything like that?
Yeah, that's an outcome from the Northwest Historic District Commission discussion at one point.
Yeah.
Yeah, the following day or so, I did contact the building department in Northborough and also another architect, and the consensus between those two folks was that those regulations don't apply when we're
Because
talking.
they're historic?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay. Thank you.
Yeah. I guess the only other thing I would add is, I attended on December 15th a meeting for the Mass Historical Commission for the Massachusetts Preservation Project funding that's coming up round this would be round 29, due in, I think it's February 23rd. And we were talking earlier, somebody was talking earlier, it is a reimbursement, so, but it is CPC, funds they do accept for matching grants, so when, we plan on pursuing that as well, depending on, what the outcome of that is, that money will be used to offset whatever funds come from the CPC funding. So that is definitely a possible way of offsetting some of the cost. I can't obviously anticipate what the result will be, hopefully good, but we'll see.
You're pursuing that grant process currently?
Yeah. There is a kind of one snag, and that is, they do require for capital grants, capital projects like we're talking about, they do require what they call a preservation restriction in perpetuity on the building. So if you want some of their money, you have to agree to keep, put a basically, I don't want to call it a lien, but a land use restriction on the property, so that from that point on, there'll be no allowability to change the use of the structure. You can't, put in a McDonald's or something like that. So that's something, that's something that we have not discussed with the general group membership, but probably will need to be, because as I see it, it's an actual legal document, it's a deed restriction. It requires a lawyer to draft it and sign accordingly. And that could be a stumbling block, depending on,
For funding.
Yeah,
For the match.
yeah, you have to agree to that as far as they're providing you the funds.
Well,
So-
those don't come for free either. There's a financial,
I don't think it has to do with the use, though. I think it has to do with the preservation of certain aspects of the building. So, like, for example, you can't put vinyl siding on it. It would have to retain, the historic character.
Mhm.
Like the windows, you wouldn't be able to replace the windows with modern windows. They would still have to be.
Okay.
I know one of the properties that I'm familiar with that has a preservation restriction of that type. So the historic, Mass Historic had to approve certain modifications, like they wanted to do the weatherization. So they required a new interior window and the original exterior window, so nobody could see the new window from the outside.
Mhm.
So there's some stuff like that.
Okay.
So it may not be as limiting as you fear.
I frankly don't have a problem with it because, we're trying to keep the preservation aspect of the building. But I think the only feedback I've heard in the negative would be if for some reason the society goes bankrupt for whatever reason, and, that's the only asset the society has is the building and the property. And if there's a land restriction on it somehow, does that then encumber the sale in some way that limits, a person who might be interested in buying it from doing that?
They would just have to be held to the same restriction. So you could still sell it, so somebody could convert it into a residence if they wanted to. However, they would still have to maintain the historic windows, the historic siding. So the preservation restriction will specify what needs to be preserved. So, it's the most, like you could include some of the special qualities in the interior, or it could just deal with the exterior. So it depends on how you craft it.
So you think if somebody purchased the property, if the worst happened, we sold it, somebody could say, as long as they kept the aspects of the preservation items, you could maybe make it into condominiums or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, it depends on how you craft the preservation restriction. So you wanna make sure that it's loose enough that will allow alternative uses.
Okay.
So you think very carefully about what those special features are. And then I believe it ultimately has to be approved by Mass Historic. Right?
Yes,
Yeah,
that's
So.
in their application.
yeah. And then there's somebody who receives the preservation restriction, and they'll be the ones to keep the property owner on it. So they do inspections to ensure that the property owner hasn't violated the preservation restriction. So you can think of who you want to hold the restriction.
Well, we don't plan to go bankrupt anytime soon, so it might not hurt you, but
Yeah.
it might be something that sways somebody from wanting to have that on the deed. And I
But
don't
it
think-
does open you up for a whole host of funding that you're otherwise not available.
With that restriction.
Yeah.
Yeah, from Mass Historic, they said, we are a tax exempt, 503C, and we are on the historic register of historic places, so we do qualify in that respect, and I know we don't have the restriction on it yet, but you're right, he said if you do get that, then the following years, when the next round comes up, you're, kind of in a better spot for getting this stuff.
So it's also kind of, some would view it as a feather in your cap.
I
So you have that preservation restriction, so it's not necessarily that.
Are there any places in town that have one? Are you aware?
Well, I know the Ace of Waters Mansion in Millbury has one, and that's a municipally owned property, and so that's why I'm so familiar with it. And, I did grant writing for that project, so so the weatherization, so that building was built in 1825, and it didn't have any insulation, and it's used as an event venue, so that was a big problem. So, we had to get special approval for the type of insulation, so it had to be blown-in insulation, and we couldn't negatively impact the walls, so they actually ended up having to take out the boards, drill holes into the building, put in the insulation, and then board up, put the original boards back on. So it's, it's more expensive to do things, but then there's huge benefits as far as grant money is concerned.
And you are the Historical Society, so
Yeah.
Yeah, I would think as a historical society, that would be
Yeah,
something you would want to do.
I would think so, too.
yeah.
That's a good point.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Mike?
I mean, hopefully, just one more thing, hopefully, ultimately, there will be one on White Cliffs, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah, absolutely, because it was bought with CPA money,
Yeah.
so that's a requirement.
Right.
Great, thanks for coming and giving us more input.
Absolutely. Any questions, I'm happy to come back or answer them.
Appreciate it. We'll
Email or otherwise.
we'll be talking about you again.
Okay.
Yeah, Norm knows a lot about the, preservation restrictions, so has to come to one of our, yeah, has to want to come to one of our meetings, and we'll have you back as a guest.
Okay.
We miss you anyway.
Okay.
So at this point, I just wanted to bring up to the committee that we should make a determination if we would like to close the public hearing. We have traditionally done so after we've heard different applicants' presentations. And so, any opinion on that? Shall we proceed in the same manner?
I move we close the public hearing.
Thank you for the motion.
Second.
Second from Jeff. Any discussion on the motion to close the public hearing? Hearing No comment on the hearing. All in favor of closing the public hearing? And those against? None. So we are 7-0 unanimous to close the public hearing. And that's great. We have the matter of minutes from December 2nd.
Move to approve the minutes of December 1st,
Second.
2nd.
I have one amendment.
Oh, amend the agenda.
Please,
Says I'm both absent and present. I know, remarkable. But I was present.
two places at once.
Actually, December 1st, I believe.
Oh, you're listed on both? Oh.
I totally missed that, and Michelle asked us to look at it. So it should be December 1st. And Millie was not in two places at once. She was here. Peter was the only one absent on, Peter was here. So he's listed twice, too. Okay, so who was here? Let's check that. I was here. Andy Dowd was here? Yes. Andy Clark was here. Millie was here. Sean was here. Jeff was here. Peter was here. Todd was, we had everybody? Todd, Leslie, Andy. Okay.
Todd was there, right?
Yeah, was Peter here?
Peter wasn't.
He was sitting right next to me. I'm almost positive.
I was sitting on the end, but I don't
Unless it was
remember,
Jeff.
but,
Yeah, but Todd was there.
yeah.
Peter
I-
was here?
No, Peter
I
wasn't.
don't think he was.
Was not here.
Peter was here. Peter's not here tonight.
We're not still on air, are we?
Todd is not here tonight, but Todd was here.
Todd was here for that.
Todd was here.
Yeah, Todd was there.
All right. So,
He was hanging out in the cooler.
nobody was absent.
With me.
It was December 1st, not 2nd. Any other amendments to the minutes? So would you update your motion, Jeff?
Move that we accept the amended minutes for December 2nd, 2022.
Second.
And Leslie, second. Thank you. And all in favor of approving the minutes? Those opposed? We are unanimous to approve minutes. It's wicked exciting. Okay, we are scheduled to meet again February 2nd. We could meet conference room B like normal, with a little more room. Well, in a different way, but we don't have to have the selectmen's room, since it might be needed for somebody else.
It's Groundhog Day. Can't meet, got big plans.
Meeting not contingent on if he sees a shadow.
I had not seen that.
Any other business anyone wants to bring up?
Just quickly.
Yes, sir.
That email about we get a little bit more money, do you know just roughly, so I can kind of mull it around before the next meeting?
The number?
How much will we have available to disperse, roughly?
How much we have this year, or what was the available money? What's the
Yeah,
question?
what was the available money?
The extra money?
Yeah.
You had it,
Yeah.
you printed out the thing? or no?
That's not gonna be available.
Right.
That's not.
This one,
That's
sure.
around
Yeah,
for
correct.
next year, something like
Oh, okay, so then, that's not for this year.
Correct.
So roughly what do we have to disperse this year?
This year, we have, according to Mr. Jason Little, we have, the new revenue figure we're working with is 770,000,
Yep.
new revenue, and the reserves are, 1,050,000. So total technically available, 1,820,000.
Okay,
1,820,000.
got it, thank you.
So I think what I anticipate that we'll do next meeting is either put up the whiteboard or put up a chart somehow, and we'll work backwards a little bit with what we know our minimum obligations are, White Cliff bond, and start from there. And then, also,
Excel spreadsheet would be.
in the back of our heads, input regarding the White Cliffs proposals that have come in, any new information from White Cliffs Committee, and Todd is on that committee, we'll assume he'll bring forth that discussion. Okay, good. Anyone interested in adjourning?
Move to adjourn.
Second.
Second, Randy, all in favor? Awesome. We are adjourned.